Desperate after 3 straight months of terrible sales at Kentucky Fried Chicken, Colonel Sanders decided to make an unusual call. "Hello, Your Holiness. This is Colonel Sanders. I need a favor." "What can I do for you, my son?" asked the Pope. "Holy Father, I need you to change the Lord's Prayer. Instead of 'Give us this day our daily bread,' I wanted to say, 'Give us this day our daily chicken.' If you do that, I'll donate $10 million to the Vatican." The Pope sighed. "I'm sorry, my son, but I cannot change the words of the Lord's Prayer." Disappointed, the colonel hung up. A month later, sales were still plummeting. Desperate, he called again. "Your Holiness, please, I'll donate $50 million if you make the change." The Pope hesitated. "Colonel, that is a generous offer, and the Church could do much good with that money, but I still cannot alter the Lord's Prayer." Another 2 months passed, and things only got worse. The colonel, at his wits' end, called one last time. "This is my final offer, Your Holiness. $100 million. Just change the prayer to 'Give us this day our daily chicken.'" The Pope took a deep breath. "Let me get back to you." The next day, he gathered his cardinals. "Brothers, I have good news and bad news. What's the good news, Your Holiness?" "KFC is donating $100 million to the Vatican." The cardinals cheered. "And the bad news?" one asked. The Pope sighed. "We just lost the Wonder Bread account." A husband and wife were driving from Key West to Boston. After nearly 24 hours on the road, they were exhausted and decided to stop at a nice hotel for a few hours of rest. They checked in, slept for just 4 hours, and then went to check out. The desk clerk handed them a bill for $350. The man's jaw dropped. $350? We were only here for 4 hours. That's outrageous. The clerk calmly replied, "That's our standard rate." Furious, the man demanded to speak to the manager. The manager arrived and explained, "Sir, this hotel has an Olympic-sized pool, a world-class spa, and a luxurious conference center, all available for your use." "But we didn't use any of those things," the man argued. "Ah, but they were here, and you could have," the manager replied with a smile. The manager went on, "We also have live entertainment, some of the best performers from New York and Las Vegas." "We didn't see any shows," the man protested. "But you could have," the manager said smugly. No matter what the manager listed, the man kept repeating, "But we didn't use it." Finally, realizing he wasn't going to win, the man sighed, pulled out his checkbook, and wrote a check for $100. The manager frowned. "Sir, this check is short. It's only for $100. "That's right," said the man. "I'm charging you $250 for sleeping with my wife." The manager's face turned red. "What? I didn't sleep with your wife." The man smiled. "Well, she was here and you could have." Tim suffered a terrible accident at work. He fell through a floor tile and lost both of his ears. Permanently disfigured, he settled with the company for a large sum of money and moved on. Wanting to invest, Tim bought a growing telecom company called Plexus Communications. But after signing the deal, he realized he knew nothing about running a business. So he set up interviews to hire a CEO. The first candidate was knowledgeable and experienced. At the end of the interview, Tim asked, "Do you notice anything different about me?" The man hesitated, then said, "Well, you have no ears." Tim's face turned red. "Get out." The second candidate, a highly qualified woman, impressed him even more. At the end, he asked her the same question. She carefully replied, "Yes, you have no ears." Tim clenched his jaw. "Get out!" Frustrated, he called in the third and final candidate, a sharp, confident young man fresh out of college. The kid was bright, well-spoken, and seemed like the perfect fit. Hesitant but hopeful, Tim asked, "Do you notice anything different about me?" The young man studied him for a moment and then said, "Yes, you wear contact lenses." Tim was stunned. "That's incredible. How did you know?" The young man burst out laughing. "Well, glasses would fall right off, wouldn't they?" A young man from Nebraska moves to Florida and lands a job at a massive everything-under-one-roof department store. On his first day, the manager asks, "Do you have any sales experience?" The kid replies, "Yeah, back in Omaha, I was one of the best Bible salesmen around." The manager likes his confidence and hires him on the spot. "You start tomorrow. I'll check in at closing to see how you did. At the end of the day, after the store is locked up, the manager asks, "So, how many customers did you sell to?" The kid says, "One." "One? Our salespeople average 20 to 30 customers a day. How much was the sale for?" $101,237.65. The manager's jaw drops. $101,237.65? Holy Mother of Mary! What on earth did you sell? The kid grins. Well, it started with a small fish hook. Then I sold him a medium fish hook, then a large fish hook. After that, I sold him a new fishing rod. When I asked where he was planning to fish, he said down the coast. So I took him to the boat department and sold him a twin-engine Boston whaler. Then he realized his car couldn't tow it. So we went to the automotive department and I sold him a fully loaded 4x4 truck. The manager is stunned. Let me get this straight. A guy came in to buy a fish hook and you sold him a boat and a truck? The kid shakes his head. No, sir. He came in to buy tampons for his wife. I just said, buddy, your weekend's shot and might as well go fishing. A businessman was in serious trouble. His company was failing, he was drowning in debt, and he had poured everything he had into keeping it afloat. With creditors closing in, he was so desperate that he even considered ending it all. As a last resort, he went to a priest and poured out his troubles. After listening intently, the priest said, "Here's what I want you to do. Take a beach chair and a Bible, drive to the beach, and sit at the water's edge. Place the Bible in your lap and let the wind flip through the pages. Eventually, the pages will settle. Read the first thing you see. That will be your answer." A year later, the businessman returned to the priest, this time in an expensive custom suit with his wife in a mink coat and his children looking radiant. He handed the priest an envelope stuffed with cash as a donation. The priest, amazed, asked, "You did as I suggested?" "Absolutely," the businessman replied. "You went to the beach?" "Absolutely." "You sat in the chair, placed the Bible in your lap, and let the pages turn?" "Absolutely." "And what was the first thing you saw?" The businessman smiled and said, "Chapter 11. A small office put up a sign in its window. "Help wanted. Must be able to type, good with a computer, and bilingual. We are an equal opportunity employer." A short while later, a dog trotted up to the building, read the sign, and walked inside. He approached the receptionist, wagging his tail eagerly, then pointed his nose at the sign and let out a small whine. The receptionist blinked. "You want to apply?" The dog wagged harder. Amused but curious, she called the office manager. When the manager arrived and saw the applicant, he nearly laughed out loud. "Look, buddy, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but this is an office job. You have to be able to type." The dog immediately jumped onto a chair, placed his paws on the keyboard, and typed out a flawless, perfectly formatted letter. Then he hit print, retrieved the paper, and handed it over like a seasoned professional. The manager's jaw dropped. "Okay, that's impressive, but you also need to be good with a computer." The dog hopped off the chair, trotted over to the computer, and got to work. He effortlessly navigated through different programs, created a spreadsheet, formatted a PowerPoint presentation, and even adjusted the office Wi-Fi settings for better speed. By now, the manager was completely floored. "This is unreal," he muttered. "But there's still one more requirement. The sign says you must be bilingual." The dog sighed, locked eyes with the manager, and said, "Meow." Dave was a great worker, friendly, reliable, and well-liked. But there was one problem. He never attended company events. Eventually, his boss had enough and called him into his office. "Dave," the boss sighed, "you're a good employee, but you need to be more of a team player. Why do you never come to our events?" "I'm sorry, boss," Dave replied. "It's just, I'm always busy with people I already know. Honestly, I know so many people, famous ones too." The boss chuckled. "Oh, really? You expect me to believe that?" "Go ahead," Dave shrugged. "Name someone famous. I bet I know them." Amused, the boss smirked. "All right, Dave. How about Tom Cruise?" "Tom? Oh yeah, we go way back. I can prove it." Skeptical but intrigued, the boss agreed. They flew out to Hollywood and knocked on Tom Cruise's door. To his shock, Tom Cruise himself opened it, grinned, and said, "Dave, my man, long time no see. Come on in for a beer." The boss was stunned but still not convinced. Okay, he said as they left. That was impressive, but maybe you just got lucky. Name someone else you supposedly know. Go for it, Dave said confidently. All right, the boss shot back. Donald Trump. Ah, Trumpy, Dave grinned. We go way back. Let's head to Washington. So off they went. At the White House, they joined a tour group, but as soon as Trump spotted Dave, he broke into a big smile. Dave, what a surprise. Forget this meeting. I've got time for a beer. Bring your friend. The boss was now visibly shaken, but still refused to fully believe it. All right, Dave, he said after they left. One more. If you can pull this off, I'll admit you really do know everyone. Name them, Dave challenged. The Pope, the boss said smugly. Dave just nodded. Ah, Frankie? Sure thing. Let's go to Rome. So they flew to Vatican City and joined the massive crowd in St. Peter's Square. The boss looked around at the sea of people. Dave, this is ridiculous. How are you going to prove you know the Pope? Dave thought for a moment. I can't get his attention from down here, but I know the guards. Give me a minute. I'll go up to the balcony with him. The boss scoffed, but sure enough, half an hour later, the Pope emerged onto the balcony with Dave standing beside him, waving to the crowd. But when Dave returned to the square, he found his boss lying on the ground, paramedics surrounding him. Boss? Dave rushed over. What happened? The boss, barely able to speak, wheezed, I was doing fine until some guy next to me tapped my shoulder and said, who the heck is that up there with Dave? One morning, an elderly woman walked into the Bank of America carrying an enormous bag of cash. With a determined look, she approached the receptionist. I need to speak with the bank president immediately, she declared. I have a large sum of money to deposit. The receptionist hesitated. Ma'am, the president is very busy. Perhaps I insist. Seeing the old lady's resolve, the receptionist sighed and disappeared into the back office. A few minutes later, she returned. You're in luck. He'll see you now. The old lady was ushered into a grand office where the bank president, a well-dressed man in his 50s, sat behind an imposing desk. He leaned forward, curious. Good morning, madam. How can I help you? I'd like to open an account and deposit this money, she said, plopping the bag onto his desk. He raised an eyebrow. That's quite a lot of cash. How much exactly? $180,000, she replied matter-of-factly. As she began dumping wads of bills onto his desk, the president's curiosity deepened. If you don't mind me asking, how did you come by this money? We're not in the business of laundering funds. The old lady chuckled. Oh, it's nothing illegal. I make bets. Bets? He repeated, intrigued. That's right. For instance, I'll bet you $25,000 that by this time tomorrow your right hand will taste like eggs. Just your right hand, not your left. The president blinked. Excuse me? You heard me. If I'm wrong, I'll pay you $10,000. If I'm right, you owe me $25,000. Deal? The banker was dumbfounded. It made no sense. His hands had never tasted like eggs. But he was a man of finance, and the prospect of an easy 10 grand was too tempting to pass up. All right, he said, shaking on it. See you tomorrow at 9 a.m. As she turned to leave, she added, Oh, and I'll be bringing my lawyer as a witness. No backing out. There was a man who prided himself on taking exceptional care of his body. He hit the gym religiously, lifted weights, and ran 6 miles a day. His physique was impeccable, and he knew it. One day, after admiring himself in the mirror, he noticed something odd. His entire body was tanned, except for one particular area. That just wouldn't do. Determined to fix this cosmetic flaw, he came up with a bold idea. The next morning, he arrived at a quiet stretch of beach, stripped off all his clothes, and buried himself in the sand, except for one part, which he left sticking up to catch the sun. Satisfied with his plan, he relaxed, basking in the warmth of the morning sun. A short while later, 2 elderly ladies came strolling along the shore, enjoying their morning walk. One of them leaned on a cane as they took in the salty breeze and soft waves. Suddenly, she stopped, tilting her head. Would you look at that? She muttered, pointing her cane at the curious sight protruding from the sand. Intrigued, she gave it a nudge with her cane, then a little poke. She sighed deeply and shook her head. "There's just no justice in this world," she said. Her friend, puzzled, asked, "What do you mean?" The old lady sighed again. "Well, when I was 20, I was curious about it. When I was 30, I enjoyed it. When I was 40, I asked for it. When I was 50, I paid for it. When I was 60, I prayed for it. When I was 70, I forgot about it. And now I'm 80. The darn things are growing wild on the beach, and I'm too old to squat." One afternoon, a farmer took his old truck to the local mechanic for some much-needed repairs. Unfortunately, the shop couldn't fix it right away, so he decided to walk home. It wasn't too far, after all. On his way, he made a few stops. At the hardware store, he picked up a bucket and a gallon of paint. Then at the feed store, he bought 2 chickens and a goose. Now loaded down with his purchases, he stepped outside and quickly realized he had a problem. How in the world was he supposed to carry everything home? As he stood there, scratching his head, an elderly woman approached him. "Excuse me, young man," she said kindly. "I'm a bit lost. Can you tell me how to get to 1603 Mockingbird Lane?" The farmer chuckled. "Well, ma'am, as a matter of fact, my farm is just a stone's throw from that house. I'd be happy to walk you there, but as you can see, I've got my hands full." The old lady glanced at his load, then smiled knowingly. "That's easy, dear. Just put the paint can inside the bucket, carry the bucket in one hand, tuck a chicken under each arm, and hold the goose in your other hand." The farmer's face lit up. "Why, thank you, ma'am. That's a fine idea." With his goods now expertly arranged, they started walking together. As they neared a narrow alley, the farmer said, "Let's take this shortcut. It'll get us there much quicker." The old lady suddenly stopped in her tracks and gave him a wary look. "Now listen here, young man. I am a lonely widow, and I have no husband to defend me. How do I know that once we step into that alley, you won't push me against the wall, pull up my skirt, and have your way with me?" The farmer was flabbergasted. "Good heavens, lady, I'm carrying a bucket, a gallon of paint, 2 chickens, and a goose. How in the world could I possibly do such a thing?" The old woman winked and replied, "Well, if you were to do such a thing, you'd set the goose down, cover it with the bucket, put the paint on top to weigh it down, and I'd hold the chickens." A police officer was walking his beat one evening when something unusual caught his eye. A trail of $50 bills leading into a dark alley. Curious, he followed the money and soon spotted an elderly woman dragging 2 heavy trash bags. One of them had a hole in it, leaving a steady stream of bills in its wake. "Excuse me, ma'am," the officer called out, approaching her. "You've got a hole in one of your bags. You're losing money." The old woman gasped. "Oh, bless you, officer. I'd have never noticed. Thank you." Still intrigued, the officer couldn't help but ask, "If you don't mind me asking, where did you get all this cash?" "Well, you see, young man," she began, "I have a lovely little house right down the street. Unfortunately, it's right next to a very rowdy bar. Every night, a bunch of drunkards come stumbling out and, pardon my language, relieve themselves in my garden." She shook her head in frustration before continuing. "Well, last night I'd had enough, so I stood out there with my pruning shears, and whenever one of them got their thing out, I said, 50 bucks or I cut it off." The officer stifled a laugh, picturing the terrified drunkards fumbling for their wallets. "Well, ma'am, I suppose that's one way to handle it. Guess they'd rather pay than risk their... well, you know." He turned to leave, but then, just out of curiosity, he glanced at her other bag. "And, is that bag filled with money, too?" The old woman gave him a sly smile. "Well, not everyone pays. Not everyone." A huge, muscular man with an unusually tiny head walks into a bar and orders a beer. The bartender hands him the drink and says, "Look, I'm not gay or anything, but I gotta say, your physique is incredible. But, I gotta ask, why is your head so small?" The big guy sighs and nods, clearly used to the question. "Well," he begins, "one day, I was out hunting when I got lost deep in the woods. After hours of wandering, I heard someone crying for help. I looked around, and to my surprise, it was a frog sitting by a stream." The bartender raises an eyebrow. "A frog?" "Yep," the man continues. I picked it up, and the frog said, "Kiss me, and I'll turn into a genie and grant you 3 wishes." Now, I know how these stories go, so I looked around to make sure no one was watching, then gave the frog a little kiss. Poof! Just like that, the frog turned into the most stunning naked woman I had ever seen. She smiled and said, "You now have 3 wishes." So I looked at my skinny 60-kilo frame and said, "I want a body like Arnold Schwarzenegger." She nodded, whispered some magic words, and poof! I instantly bulked up so much that I ripped right out of my clothes. Then she asked, "What's your second wish?" I took one look at her gorgeous naked body and said, "I want to make passionate love to you right here by this stream." She nodded, laid down, and let's just say, we made love for hours. It was glorious. Afterward, as we lay there sweaty and satisfied, she leaned in close and whispered, "You still have one more wish. What will it be?" I looked into her eyes and said, "How about a little head?" A couple was golfing at an exclusive course lined with million-dollar homes. On the 3rd tee, the husband warned, "Honey, be careful with your shot. If you smash a window, it's going to cost us a fortune." The wife nodded, teed up, and absolutely crushed the ball, straight through the window of the biggest mansion on the course. The husband winced. "I told you to watch out for the houses." "All right, let's go apologize and see how much this is going to cost." They walked up to the house, knocked on the door, and heard a voice call out, "Come on in!" Stepping inside, they found shattered glass everywhere and a broken bottle lying in the middle of the floor. A man sat calmly on the couch. "Are you the ones who broke my window?" Yeah. Sorry about that," the husband admitted. "No need to apologize. In fact, I should be thanking you," the man said, grinning. "You see, I'm a genie. I was trapped in that bottle for 1,000 years until you set me free. As a reward, I'll grant you each one wish, and I'll keep the 3rd wish for myself." The couple was stunned but quickly excited. The husband went first. "I want $1 million a year for the rest of my life." "Done," the genie said. The wife thought for a moment, then said, "I want a mansion in every country in the world. Consider it done." The genie nodded. Then the husband asked, "And what's your wish?" The genie smirked. "Well, since I've been trapped in that bottle for 1,000 years, I haven't been with a woman in all that time. My wish is to sleep with your wife." The husband hesitated, then shrugged. "Well, we did just get a lifetime of money and houses, honey. I guess it's only fair." So the genie took the wife upstairs and ravished her for 2 hours. Afterward, as they lay in bed, the genie rolled over, looked at the wife, and asked, "So how old is your husband anyway?" 38, she replied. The genie laughed. "And he still believes in genies? That's adorable." A man walked into a restaurant with a full-grown ostrich following closely behind. As they sat down, the waitress came over. "What'll it be?" she asked. The man said, "I'll have a hamburger, fries, and a Coke." Then he turned to the ostrich. "And you?" "Same," said the ostrich. A short time later, the waitress returned with their food. "That'll be $6.40. The man reached into his pocket and, without looking, pulled out the exact change. The next day, the pair came in again. "The usual?" asked the waitress. "Yep," said the man. "Same," said the ostrich. Once again, the man reached into his pocket and produced the exact amount. This became a daily routine. Then, one Friday night, they walked in again. "The usual?" the waitress asked. "No, tonight I'll have a steak, baked potato, and a salad." "Same," said the ostrich. A short time later, the waitress returned. "That'll be $12.62. As always, the man reached into his pocket and handed over the exact amount. By now, the waitress couldn't hold back her curiosity. "Sir, I have to ask, how do you always have the exact change for everything?" The man smiled. "Well, several years ago I was cleaning my attic and found an old lamp. When I rubbed it, a genie appeared and granted me 2 wishes. My first wish was that no matter what I needed to pay for, big or small, I could reach into my pocket and always pull out the exact amount." The waitress gasped. "That's brilliant. Most people would wish for a fortune, but you'll always have as much money as you need." "Exactly," The man nodded. Whether it's a pack of gum or a private jet, the money is always there. The waitress nodded in admiration, then asked, So, what's the deal with the ostrich? The man sighed and shook his head. For my second wish, I asked for a tall chick with long legs who agrees with everything I say. One day, a curious boy and a girl were hanging out when the boy suddenly asked, Do you have a package? Without hesitation, the boy pulled down his trousers to show his and continued, See, this is what I have. The girl smirked, took off her trousers, and replied confidently, No, I don't have a package. I have this. And you know what? My mom says whoever has this gets 1,000 packages for free. Phil, the program manager, strolled out of his office right on schedule, waving casually at his team. See you tomorrow, guys. Joe, Rick, and Andy barely lifted their hands in response. As soon as Phil was out the door, Andy shook his head. Can you believe this? 6 months now, and that monkey walks out at 4 o'clock sharp while we're stuck here drowning in overtime. Joe sighed. I wish he'd hire more help, or at least stay and pitch in. I've missed so many of my favorite shows, I'm stuck watching reruns on weekends just to keep up. Rick rubbed his temples. Yeah, well, at least you get to catch up. My kids are growing up without me. I haven't made it to a single soccer game this month. Andy groaned. I don't even care about the project anymore. I haven't had a home-cooked meal in months because I'm always stuck here. Rick leaned back. But what can we do? We can't just walk out like he does. We have deadlines. Reluctantly, they all nodded in agreement and went back to their endless workload. A week later, the frustration boiled over during lunch. Andy slammed his fork down. That's it. I'm done with these hours. I never see my wife, and Phil has no clue how late we're stuck here. Joe nodded. Same. I missed last night's episode of my show, and now I have to avoid everyone who watched it. Rick exhaled. I hear you both. I missed another soccer game, and my wife's ready to kill me over it. Andy leaned in, lowering his voice. Then let's do what Phil does. Let's leave early. Rick's eyes widened. What? We can't just leave. We'll fall behind even more. Joe hesitated. Yeah, and what if we get caught? We could lose our jobs. Andy grinned. Think about it. Phil is our manager, the only one we report to. He leaves at 4 o'clock every day, right? So, we just leave 15 minutes later. How would he even know? Joe looked unsure. I don't know, Andy. It sounds risky. Come on, Joe. Don't you want to watch your shows? And Rick, don't you want to see your kids play? Rick hesitated. Then he sighed. All right, but we're really doing this today? Why not? Andy said. Rick, your boys have a game tonight. Imagine how happy they'd be if you showed up. Rick smiled. Yeah, that would be nice. Joe cracked a grin. Okay, fine. We're all leaving 15 minutes after Phil. The rest of the workday dragged, but for once, they weren't counting hours. They were counting minutes. At 4 o'clock on the dot, Phil strolled past their desks. See you guys tomorrow. This time, the team waved back enthusiastically. 15 minutes later, their plan went into motion. One by one, they shut down their computers and walked out. The next morning, the three met at the break room coffee machine, all grinning. Joe, practically bouncing, asked, So, how was everyone's night off? Rick beamed. Mine was amazing. My boys were so surprised they won their game, and my wife was thrilled. Joe nodded excitedly. That's awesome. I finally caught up on my shows and even started a new one. They both turned to Andy. What about you? Get that home-cooked meal? Andy's face dropped. Not exactly. I got home, and guess whose truck was in my driveway? Rick and Joe exchanged glances. No way. Andy nodded. At first I wasn't sure, so I snuck around back and peeked through the window. And there he was, Phil, sitting at my table having dinner with my wife. Joe's jaw dropped. You're kidding. Rick stifled a laugh. What did you do? Andy sighed. I bolted, hopped in my car and drove straight back to the office, spent the night at my desk. Joe and Rick burst into laughter. Andy groaned. Yeah, we're definitely not skipping out early again, boys. Lying on his deathbed, an elderly man took his wife's hand and made a final request. Honey, I don't have much time left, and there's something I need you to do when I'm gone. She nodded, holding back tears. Of course, my love. Anything you ask, I'll do. I want you to marry my old friend Jacob, he said, his voice weak but firm. His wife's eyes widened in shock. Jacob? But you always said you couldn't stand him? The old man smiled faintly and whispered, Exactly.